Hello, chums. I gave a presentation at the Advanced HE conference, and a few people who weren't at the conference were interested in what the talk was about, which was about how you could use AI to threaten the integrity of the essay. This is a short, abridged version of that talk. A couple of quick disclaimers. I work for Advanced HE as a senior advisor. However, the statements made in this talk should not be taken as expressions of Advanced HE policy or forward-looking statements from Advanced HE. They represent my own individual viewpoint as a researcher and someone who has worked in higher education. So, it's important to note, although I have a PhD in information systems and I'm generally interested in higher education technology and how it informs pedagogical practice, I'm actually not that interested in the theoretical ramifications of AI generated content or even how AI works. This talk is purely about practical ramifications of AI in higher education and assessment and what that means for us. I also completely ignore why students might want to do this. For time purposes, it would be another 15 minutes or so. There are people like Thomas Lancaster who are Kay Murdoch as well, who are far more informed about this and able to talk about academic integrity from a student perspective. This is purely about the end product. And the talk represents a thought experiment. How could we use AI to break the integrity of the essay? So, a very quick overview of how AI works. And this is deliberately very high level, and I have grossly simplified. So, if you're a technical person who knows about AI, look away now. AI is all over the media at the moment, and in higher education as well. I notice there are a lot of edtech companies springing up claiming they have AI products that will do chatbots, marking, engagement and analysis, all sorts of things. A big story about a month ago was a Google engineer who claimed that an AI product that Google is developing had become sentient, and they were suspended, and then there was lots of conversation about, is this AI sentient and alive? So very briefly, how does AI actually work? Because this is important to the practicalities we'll come to later. The AI that the engineer had claimed had come to life is a Google product called, I think you pronounce it Lambda, maybe. It's LAMDA. And we're talking about a very specific type of AI tool. So I'll call it Lambda, even if it's not pronounced that way. Lambda is short for Language Model for Digital Applications. And it's based on what we call large language models. And I'm going to grossly simplify. How these AI tools work is that we take large data sets, which could be structured or unstructured. We get the system to analyze them or train the AI, and they train them in terms of feeding them this content. And what the AI then does is, based on its training and the rule sets that we give it, it tries to predict what sentences or words or paragraphs should come next from the prompts. And the Lambda model, maybe it isn't pronounced Lambda, was trained on dialogue, i.e., it was trained to be able to converse with individuals in a natural way. And what's interesting about that model is it's very good at picking up on nuance. And so it's quite good at open-ended conversations, and it understands to an extent the nuance of sensibility. Basically, does a response to a given conversational context make sense? Okay. But this is a thing that's really important to understand, and I'll come back to later. Because these models, these AI models, are really good at predicting what is the appropriate statement or paragraph to insert, the human mind then perceives that there is consciousness behind the responses, okay? But really, it's pattern matching, and what we call string predictions. It's just predicting the things based on mathematics that seem the most appropriate. And part of the challenge of that is that we as humans try to see meaning where meaning might not exist. And therefore, researchers and the general public can see what we call synthetic text as meaningful. They can see meaning in it. And there's a few researchers have talked about them as parrots, basically. They stitch together and parrot back language based on what they've seen before. They do not actually understand what they're writing. And if you go online, you can find various examples of how people have used AI to write well-constructed but meaningless text, okay? And lots of academics actually have got really hung up on this idea. Well, it has no inherent meaning. I'm not sure that's actually a problem, as I'll come on to. So, if this all sounds complicated, do not worry about it. For the purposes of what we're interested in, which are practical applications and outcomes, I'm not sure it actually matters that you understand how AI works. We're interested in the finished product. So don't worry about it. In the same way, many of us do not understand how our mobile phones work. They work, okay? For our purposes, that's all we need to know. So I think currently academics are asking the wrong questions. The two things that academics in higher education seem really hooked up on, and I'm talking about generalists, not AI specialists, by the way, or sociologists who are interested in the ethics of AI. I'm talking purely about a very narrow slither, which is about AI and assessment writing. People are hooked up on, does AI think? And the second thing they're really hooked on, which is of significance to us, is AI any good at writing essays? I don't care. I actually think these are entirely the wrong questions. It's a red herring for us. It does not matter, I would argue, in the context of the practicalities of AI submitted work. It does matter for society in terms of things like AI and ethics and discrimination, but I'm not talking about that. I'm purely talking about the practicalities of essays as an assessment method. I think the two real questions we have to ask ourselves are, do humans see patterns? Yes, they do. Is the question, is AI good at writing essays? This is the wrong question. The right question is, can AI write an essay to the standard of, is this good enough? Or will this do? Which is an entirely different question from, are they any good? Right? It's the wrong question. I think the answer to both these questions is already yes. Here is an example of an essay that I wrote quickly using a tool called GPT-3. By the way, GPT-3 has already been packaged up by some companies online and directly marketed to students as a way for them to write their essays. This is already happening. I gave it a prompt about writing about common models of strategic management, and then basically it generated some content, and I gave it further prompts, and it generated me about 1,500 words. I couldn't be bothered for time purposes to add references. I was really just interested in writing the generic content. It took me about 5 minutes to work out how to use the tool, and then the essay itself I generated in about 30 seconds. I then generated a second essay about Michel Foucault, which was about the core works of Michel Foucault. And again, I did exactly the same process. Here's the thing. I am not claiming these are excellent essays. I'm not claiming that. What I'm claiming is, as you'll see in a moment, they're good enough. And they'll be particularly good enough because I think the actual model we will end up with is students using AI tools to generate a quick first version draft. Then they will rewrite elements of it in their own tone and add additional references and so on. But the underlying product or significant amounts of the content will be generated by the AI, not the individual. So what you will be marking is stuff that the student has inputted into a tool and just wait to see what's been pumped out the other end. So I got the AI to write both these in less than a minute. The QR codes will take you to them online. And again, do not get hooked up on Are they really good? No, I think they're incredibly mediocre. But as a basis for someone to take and improve to be okay, they will do this. Now, here's the interesting thing. I work with universities up and down the country, and I'm devious. I'm R devious. So as R devious, I took these to different colleagues, and in different ways, I introduced the essays to them. And I'd often say to them, "Oh well, a good exercise you can do with students is to get them to mark previous works. Have a look at these, see what you think, and what would you advise students about them?" Uniformly, people thought they were reasonably mediocre, but they could be improved to be good or reasonable essays. But for our purposes, the really important thing was that not a single person, I've done this at about 10 universities, and I've probably done it with about 60 or 70 colleagues at this point, not a single person has ever asked me, was this actually written by a human? It's never come up. People just think that they're written by undergraduates who were potentially time poor, who or just didn't put the effort into them. But they never ever thought that these were written by AI. And so from that level, people will find them difficult to detect. And by the way, Turnitin does not pick these up either because it's originally generated content. So attack pattern delta, I'm a Star Trek nerd. If we were going to attack the essay, how would we do it using AI? So I thought about this. If I wanted to build a system that has the maximum vulnerability to AI written essays, what would it actually look like? I am glad you asked, friends. I am, as mentioned, going to avoid why students might want to do this or the fact that they might do it without thinking. That's a different topic, okay? I want to think about the critical processes of higher education and how they can be broken by this method. So if we were looking for the perfect system that had particular weaknesses for the use of AI, I think it would look like the following. First of all, I would build a system of massification. So I would build a system where we have really large modules, maybe 200, 300, 400, even up to 800 students per module. And you have, therefore, a pressure to develop assessments that are easy to manage economically and administratively. Lots of authentic assessments and other assessment types that are more beneficial to students than the essay are time consuming. And they're time consuming not only in the sense that the actual production is time consuming, but one thing that always kills me when I read them in pedagogical literature, best practice literature, says, oh, we did this Viva process with students and we had 20 students and we did an in-person Viva with them and it was really authentic and it meant that we could prove academic integrity. Well, that's all fine, except if you scale up to modules which have 3, 5, 800 students, you also have to scale up things like, oh, 5% of the students needed to reschedule, right? It quickly becomes mind-bogglingly complicated and difficult to manage. So in systems of massification, you are going to be pushed towards methods that are easy to produce. The second thing that I would do if I was building a system that was easy for AI to crack is I would build a system where academic staff were time poor in the sense that they had really tight timetables for receiving work to mark, moderating it, and providing marks back to students. So I'd say to them, you must mark and turn work around in 15 working days. The next thing I would do is I would have a system where large amounts of the labor working in this system are precarious. So that I would build a system where a lot of people are paid by the hour, or they're paid on contracts where if you divide the money provided for the amount of time per script or per essay, it's minute. So you've got an academic who potentially is leading the module, who is time poor in the sense that they've got to manage a whole potentially even up to 10 or 15 precarious associate tutors who need to mark lots of stuff on a model where the model doesn't give them financially or time wise much time to do this, and potentially these precarious staff are busy looking for full-time roles or working 2 or 3 contracts at a single institution or 2 or 3 contracts at multiple institutions. So there isn't the time and the scope in the system for people not to feel pressured. And the final thing I would do is I would build an academic year which has really tight timescales, especially around assessment boards, progression boards, and award boards. And I'd therefore have a system where all the way through, economically, you have built a system where assessment methods like the essay and the report are prevalent because, from a time perspective and an economic perspective, they're the only things that make sense. Now, I don't want anyone to take this as an attack on hardworking colleagues. Please do not take it this way. But this is the system we actually have. And so if we have a system where the people that are the watch guards effectively on the towers do not have the time or the space to A, construct meaningful innovative assessments, and do not have the time really to dig into individual assessments at a great level of depth, we are going to have problems. This is the perfect system for students to use AI generated essays. And are they going to generate AI essays that are 70 plus? At the moment, no. Are they going to generate essays that are good enough? Yes. And I've had conversations with people who say, I have already seen this. I have had students who have confessed to me that they've used such tools. So the system we have built is the system that in its current form is vulnerable to attack from students using these freely available tools. And if we scale it up, many institutions also franchise out their programs to other institutions, either overseas in the United Kingdom. Having worked in such a system, that's problematical because if you try and do complicated things as the franchiser, it's actually problematical for the people who are franchising it for you because of their own economic models. And so you often come under pressure to do assessments such as the essay because they're the things that make economic and process sense for your partners. And that's the system we built. And the economics of the essay therefore increase in the franchise system. There is, however, hope. Um, it's not all negative. I I'm very lucky. Twitter is a great place for me to interact with people who are far cleverer than I am. Lots of people have got really good ideas about how we can use AI in constructive ways to think about in terms of metacognition, self-regulation of learning, ethics of AI, thinking about AI and discrimination, and to think about how can we use AI and acknowledge that AI will be used to students in ways that we build into our assessment methods? A few final thoughts. Are we likely to see the adaptation of AI into essays? That is already happening. And by the way, when I gave this talk live, a colleague who works in computer science said, one of their issues is they do authentic assessments where students write code for live project briefs. But he said the problem is there are now software packages that will write the code for them. So we have no idea if students are actually writing their own code anymore. But we will see adaptation of AI into assessments. When I wrote this 2 weeks ago, I said AI marking is likely already happening. I will note somebody contacted me and on the conditions of confidentiality told me they are already using AI to mark their assessments. It's already happening. There's a whole conversation about the morality of that I had with that colleague, but I did say to them that I would respect their confidentiality. The next thing is we are absolutely going to see adaptation of these tools by contract cheating companies. It makes perfect sense to automate. If you are someone who works for a contract cheating company, why are you not going to speed up your working method by using AI tools? So if it's not already being used by contract cheating companies, it will. We are seeing in some marketplaces, and I work extensively in Asia and the Middle East, a hard turn back to in-person exams. I think we are going to see a regressive turn back to in-person exams as a mechanism to try and avoid some of the issues that we're seeing around these tools and contract cheating. Some people have suggested about using ungraded as a method to get around this. I'm agnostic on that, but I thought I'd mention it. Are we going to see a technologies arm race by companies like Turnitin and so on? We are. But in my mind, the solution to all of this is social, political, and economic. Create workloads that allow academic staff to write assessments that are meaningful, innovative, but overcome some of these issues. Increase the size of academic integrity units to advise colleagues on this, and pay experts who are experts in academic integrity. And also think about the conditions of labour. Uh, if you have more colleagues who are precarious colleagues, and this is not a slight on those colleagues, please do not take it this way. This is about the conditions of labour. You are creating the conditions in which it is easier to put this stuff through the system, because a system staffed by precarious staff, you are attacking the integrity of the system by doing that. Thank you, colleagues. Please do email me, charles.knight@advanced-he.ac.uk if you want to talk about this, or if you are another person doing AI marking who wants to talk to me confidentially. Thank you, colleagues.